Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation. Before we go ahead and start off today's presentation, I wanted to cover a bit of housekeeping information with you. Today's presentation will be recorded, so if you wanted a copy of the recording for review or to share with a colleague, please check your inbox in the days following the event for a link to the recording, and we'll be sending that out as soon as it's available. Also, we will be attaching a link to download a copy of the slides as well, so you can find that in that same email. If at any point you have a question or a comment for one of today's presenters, please feel free to direct them via the Q&A window or our chat function, and we'll do our best to cover all questions as time allows. So without much ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's presentation. The topic for today's presentation is migrating to WVD, look no file shares. And we're joined by George Swain from Liquidware and Jim Moyle from Microsoft. I think Jim's going to go ahead and start us away. So Jim, why don't you go ahead and take the presentation off?
Thanks very much. So the first part of the presentation, we're going to talk generally around Windows Virtual Desktop or WVD. And if we look at the sort of scenarios that we see that people are using Windows Virtual Desktop for, there's some fairly classic scenarios, and we'll just have a quick look through them. So security and regulation. There's sort of verticals that are highly regulated and tend to like doing a virtual desktop because it means that their IP is safe and they have control over their data. Elastic Workforce, also a good one. The ability of the cloud and desktop virtualization to spin up an environment that is super quick to do and very functional in a very cost-effective and timely fashion is key to this kind of elastic workforce, where you have a seasonal or short-term workers, M&A, and that sort of thing. There are also workers who've got specific needs, whether it's BYOD, call centers, or branch workers, also ideal use cases for desktop virtualization. And then specialized workloads. So we see a lot of dev test, a lot of the ability to take a legacy app, which is maybe not suitable for deployment to a physical endpoint. We can deploy that via a remoting protocol. And also CAD-CAM is very, very useful because you tend to find that a lot of these companies have requirements for different software or even different versions of software, and the ability to switch between these depending on who they're working with and what they're working on is super key to those users. And if we look specifically at Windows Virtual Desktop, so this went generally available worldwide September the 30th last year. So we're starting to see some maturity in the platform. And there's a couple of key things we want to talk about. One, it's the only way to deliver the new multi-session Windows 10 experience. There are specific optimizations, and this is not just the acquisition of FSLogix a little while ago, but also Office itself and the underlying Windows platform has been matured for Office 365, and Microsoft as a whole is now taking that Office experience in a virtualized desktop super seriously. One of the interesting things about that is now we can do a client multi-session OS in the cloud. It means that you can keep your physical device OS version and your virtual device and your cloud device all in sync in terms of that user experience. If you've got an existing on-prem deployment of desktop virtualization, you can migrate those existing server desktops and applications into Azure super simply. And it wouldn't be a cloud slide if it didn't say deploy and scale in minutes. Now, we've got a lot of customers already in production at large scale on Windows Virtual Desktop. And you can take from some of these customer lists that it's really across a lot of verticals, from financial to manufacturing to healthcare to governmental. many people, many different types of people, companies are taking advantage of Windows Virtual Desktop. Now, we'll be familiar with both of these virtualization hosts from our on-premises experience. On the left, we've got Windows Server, which has always been a very resource optimized platform, multi-session. You can get Office Perpetual, and you can also recently get Office 365 Pro Plus supported on Server 2019 and LTSC. Now, this is a very static underlying OS, and calls back to what I was saying about you want to give that your users a consistent experience. And being on a server OS, although it's very good for your resources, is perhaps not so good for that, and maybe not so good for your app compat as well. Whereas on the other side of the slide, on the right-hand side, we've got your traditional Windows 10 Enterprise, which is single session, Office 365 Pro Plus, and the semi-annual channel. So you get the innovation as it is released, but not so great on resources. And if we take what we have now, which is Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session, it brings together the best of both worlds, from that multi-session resource optimized server OS to the highly compatible, constantly innovated client OS that we have on the right hand side. And if we look at the telemetry that we get from Windows Virtual Desktop, we see that 90% of people are opting for this Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. The popularity of this method of deploying applications and deploying desktops in the marketplace shows what a good idea it was to release a multi-session client OS. Now, I want to talk a little bit about existing partners and their brokers. Now, Citrix and Windows Virtual Desktop is available worldwide. That is a GA product. And as part of that, you get all the advantages of WVD. You get access to Windows 10 multi-session. You get access to FSLogix, and in the future, you get access to MSIX app attach. But you also get the value add of these partners. And I just want to pull out a couple of things here from this slide. So that hybrid cloud journey. If you've got an existing Citrix deployment on premises, you can move to Azure for some of your workload, and you can get that single pane of glass administrative experience across the cloud and on premises. Environment management, so enhanced environment management. Image management, so MCS is a part of the Citrix offering, which will work on top of WVD in Azure. And what we've done with Citrix, we've also done with VMware. Now, this isn't GA yet, but it is in public preview. And it's the same story for VMware Horizon Cloud. You can get your on-premises deployment, extend it into the cloud, and use the brand new features of Windows Virtual Desktop along with the features you love from VMware Horizon Cloud. Whether it's the broad endpoint support, again, that hybrid environment support, which is super important to a lot of organizations as they are moving to the cloud and taking advantage of that consumption-based pricing for their environment. Again, user environment management and wide peripheral support. Now let's take a quick look at the extended partner ecosystem. I'm not going to go through the SIs, we all know that. But the number of ISVs that are coming to Windows Virtual Desktop as certified partners is great. And even if you don't see one of your existing partners on there, it's likely that they are going through that certification process right now. And that list of partners is expanding all the time. Now, if you'd have seen this slide or an equivalent slide when we first released the service, obviously this list would have been a lot smaller. But Liquidware would have been on there. So Liquidware have been a partner of Windows Virtual Desktop since the very beginning. They've got a lot of experience in integrating their products within Azure, taking advantage of the Azure platform as a service options, which is why we're talking about no file shares today, and I'll not steal George's thunder too much on that one. But Microsoft are very open with their roadmap, and it enables our partners to do what they're good at and integrate well with Windows Virtual Desktop. And Liquidware have done an excellent job of that over the last 6 or so months, and adding value for their customers, which we, as Microsoft, we really love to see our partners doing. In terms of hardware partners, again, there's a lot of people who are working towards certification. The 2 hardware partners that have already certified are Samsung and IGEL. IGEL Linux-based thin clients have GA'd with their WVD client. The higher-end Samsung phones have a feature called Samsung DeX or Desktop Experience, and the WVD client is baked in to that DeX experience. Now, that means that you can use your phone as a thin client, and you don't need to get any other hardware. So that works really well. I really enjoy demoing that. That's a lot of fun. Now, if you're thinking, am I eligible for WVD? Most people already are eligible. And in terms of licensing, Windows Virtual Desktop, the use of that control plane is included in the entitlements once you have one of these licenses that we can see on screen. So M365 E3 and above, and Windows 10 Enterprise E3 and above, and Windows 10 VDA per user. If you have any of these, then you can use the Windows Virtual Desktop control plane for free anywhere in the world today. Now, in terms of licensing, let's talk a little bit about an RDS CAL. Everybody's very familiar with having to purchase RDS CALs for desktop virtualization. And if you're doing desktop virtualization on a server, that is still the case. You still need to buy an RDS CAL. If you're doing Windows 10 multi-session, no RDS CAL is needed. This is one of the reasons also that people are using Windows 10 multi-session over a server OS is that licensing benefit. We tend to see that, you know, if somebody's got O365 E3, then the uplift from O365 E3 to M365 E3 is not that different from an RDS CAL. And M365 brings you so many more benefits over Office 365, and it's going to be fairly cost neutral for you if you use Windows 10 multi-session, which is an excellent way to get the additional benefits of M365 into your organization without paying any extra money. Now, we're all familiar with how paying for a VM works in cloud, right? You pay for the storage, you pay for the networking, and you pay for the compute, and you pay for the OS. In Windows Virtual Desktop, the OS license is entitled through the M365 E3 and the licenses we see for the client. So that means that when you're spinning up a VM in Azure, you're not paying for the additional uplift of that OS license on the VM. Now, especially if you take advantage of the 1 or 3 year reserved pricing, you can save almost 50% on your normal pay-as-you-go price, or sorry, on your normal price for that VM, because you're not paying for that additional OS license. Reserve pricing is also interesting. Now, reserve pricing is good if you have a very predictable workload. And pay-as-you-go is good for consumption. I think that the ability to combine these two pricing options is great for customers, because you can say, well, I know what my minimum workload is across a year or 3 years, and I can then say, right, well, that's what I'll buy in reserved instances. Anything above that, you can flex up with pay as you go, so it's easy to combine them. And if you do 3 years of reserved instances, then you can save up to 70% of pay as you go, plus the 50% you're saving on not paying for that additional OS license as well. So when you're running VMs in WVD, if you cost it correctly and you pick the right licensing model, it will be a lot cheaper than you think it needs to be. There are cost calculators on the web for all of this, and you can go and see what the cost would be to yourself. Just go onto the doc site, search for Windows Virtual Desktop, and it's linked from there. Now, one of the big advantages of being in Azure is that you get to take advantage of the wider Azure ecosystem. As part of M365, you get all of the advantages of Azure AD. So you get conditional access, MFA, role-based control. Azure itself is designed to be super secure, whether it's the huge amount of compliance offerings we have, the amount of cybersecurity activity that monitors and controls Azure. And Microsoft makes $1 billion annual cybersecurity investment into Azure. And let's face it, there's very few companies out there which can say that they're making that kind of investment into the security of their own platforms. And just by using Windows Virtual Desktop in Azure, you can take advantage of all of that security. Now, there are additional cool things in terms of Windows Virtual Desktop. Reverse Connect. So RDP has been rewritten for Windows Virtual Desktop. One of the new advantages that come with Windows Virtual Desktop and RDP is this Reverse Connect feature. Reverse Connect means that whether you're on premises or in your subscription in Azure, the only communication to make WVD work is outbound on 443 and encrypted, which means that in your subscription or on premises, you do not need to open a single inbound port in your firewall to make WVD work. And we all know that that's going to make the security experts in your organization very happy. We touched on Azure AD authentication before. So you get the security of Azure AD, and also the VMs will be traditionally AD joined, so you can take your existing GPOs, your existing security stance, your existing security config, and keep that and apply it to Windows Virtual Desktop. So you don't have to rewrite anything. If we look at the high-level architecture, so we can see on the right-hand side, if you look at the bottom, managed by Microsoft Compute, Storage, and Networking. This is your traditional IaaS play. We all know that when you're using VMs in the cloud, you don't need to manage your hypervisor. At the top, we'll see the traditional desktop virtualization roles, whether it's broker, load balancing, gateway, web access, etc. You will never see any VM in your subscription for these roles. This has been totally rewritten from the ground up to be cloud native, naturally multi-tenant, globally redundant, and secure. So you will never see any of that. All you need to do is sign up to the service and take advantage of these roles. Now, cloud traditionally has this shared responsibility model. And that's exactly the same here. So the middle bit, your subscription, your control, is the image and the applications. This is what's unique to your organization. So effectively, we're giving you the power to configure your applications and your image exactly how you wish to do so. It does mean that you're now responsible for updating and patching and controlling that image, but that is the shared responsibility model that we're working with here. So when I said that Windows Virtual Desktop is cloud native, one of the things that I mean by that is it has full control by a publicly documented API surface. There's nothing that is not controllable via API. And we also have full PowerShell mod management of that control plane as well. So everything is automatable if you wish it to be so. We can think of Windows Virtual Desktop as 3 layers in terms of management. The bottom layer is the session host. These are the actual things that people connect to consume a desktop or to consume an application. That is available in every single Azure location all around the world. There is also the layer above that, which is the control plane. And we can see that is what's represented in this map here. If you want to know what your experience will be, there's an experience estimator, which you can either go straight to that link that we show on the screen there, or it's linked directly from the Windows Virtual Desktop documentation on the Microsoft website. This will, hopefully, the control plane will be in every single Azure location around the world in the future, which means that, you know, if you do have data sovereignty issues, then that will be solved by making that control plane available everywhere. And then at the very top level, where we keep the service metadata information, none of this is customer information, none of this is organization information, it's just what we need to run the service. That is currently in the US and will be in the EU very shortly. If you're already familiar with WVD, there's a bit of PowerShell in there in order to configure it. And it was, you know, a V1, it's still a very fresh service. One of the big things we've been working on is proper Azure portal integration, which will mean that the Windows Virtual Desktop service will appear much more native to what you're familiar with Microsoft provided Azure service. And it will be a lot more friendly in terms of GUI and enabling you to stand up a proof of concept or a pilot super quickly. This will be coming out very soon, and it's a little taste of that screenshots that we've got in the slide there for you. If you're familiar with the App Azure program, so this is a free service provided by Microsoft where you can submit your troublesome apps. So apps that were working on Windows 7 and maybe have issues on Windows 10. Microsoft will, for free, help you with those application compatibility issues. And that service has been available for quite a long time. The new thing with App Azure is now Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session has been added to that service. So if you have problems with application compatibility running on Windows 10 Multi-Session, now you can get those applications fixed for free by Microsoft. There are a couple of caveats to that. We won't write new APIs or reinstate old insecure APIs. So not everything is included in this App Azure, but it's free. It's always should be your first port of call if you've got app compat issues. Now, we've talked a little bit about some of the stuff on the left-hand side, the current capabilities. We do have a public roadmap for Windows Virtual Desktop, which we can see through that link on the right-hand side. It doesn't have everything in it. It has what we can release and what we can give you warning of in terms of what's coming down the line. So it's worth keeping an eye on that roadmap to see if what you need in terms of future features or future locations is coming down the line, and what are the timings for that. So that's a little bit about Windows Virtual Desktop. I'm now going to hand over to George, who's going to talk very much about the integration with Liquidware and WVD. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Jim. That was great. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So obligatory company introduction slide that we always have to go through. Liquidware was formed in 2009. We're obviously an EUC-focused vendor, and we've got tight partnerships with all of the EUC OEMs. So in particular in this regard, obviously working with Jim and working with Microsoft, we were a launch partner for WVD, and we've been keeping that tight integration going forwards. So that's what we'll be looking at today. So if you're looking at potentially migrating to WVD and obtaining some of those great functionality features that Jim's just gone through, if you go straight away and go deploy a desktop from the Azure Marketplace, because Microsoft have some pre-built images, you're likely to get this. Now, personally, as someone who loves having a nice clean desktop and not having icons everywhere, this is kind of perfect for me. But obviously, this isn't what our users require. This doesn't have our users' applications. It doesn't have their data, because as much as we want them as administrators to be nice, easy users that conform to a certain type or a type of mold, they don't. Unfortunately, a lot of users look like this. So we have to take into consideration that really a user doesn't care about a desktop, and they certainly don't care about the backend infrastructure that it runs on. You know, they don't care if they're using a laptop or if they're using a virtual desktop session which has been hosted on premises via something like Citrix, or if they're obtaining that desktop via WVD. All they care about is, do I have access to my applications, and do I have access to my data, and how do I get to it? So if we're going to be providing a service like WVD, you know, maybe like Jim said, that's part of seasonal workers or a particular vertical inside your company. Maybe it's being used for business continuity. You know, failover into Azure is great to have that kind of pay-as-you-go on demand. Or maybe you are moving your whole workforce from on-premises VDI, from like Windows 7 potentially, if you're still in extended support, up into Windows 10. You need to be providing them with the same experience. Otherwise, it's kind of meaningless. You're going to cause yourself a lot of headache and issues. And at the end of the day, we don't want more help desk calls to come into us. On the first day that we swap over, you're probably going to have enough on your plate just doing that migration process, hoping that and monitoring your backend environment without, you know, hundreds of people calling up and saying that their icon isn't available in the same location. So if we are going to migrate those users to a new service and a new platform, what do we need to take into consideration, and what components make up that user's environment to do that migration itself? So traditionally, we find that we can break down that end user into multiple components. So the first is the operating system, which, you know, fairly straightforward. We're talking about Windows, nothing super out of ordinary here, but we do want to kind of leverage and take advantage of the fact that we get native Windows 10 multi-session in Azure. So we definitely want to be utilizing and leveraging that as part of the migration. We need to then obviously move the user's applications, because ultimately operating system is kind of meaningless unless we actually have the applications. That's what the end users are actually using day in, day out. That's what they're doing their job and their work with. And if we're going to be utilizing those applications, then we obviously need data, because again, it's kind of meaningless utilizing those applications if we don't have users' documents. You know, Word's kind of meaningless if we don't have actual documents to launch and run it with. And same with any other applications and their backend data sets. And finally, when we're talking about the actual piece that we covered on the previous slide, which was really around the user experience, that's the user's profile. So, you know, where does the user shortcuts exist? What have they pinned to their taskbar? What's their desktop background? You know, what gives them that familiarity so that they can just go on and do their job straight away without having to think where everything is. And kind of overarching all of them that we do have to take note of is insights. Now, we're not going to be covering that as part of today's webinar, but it is worth taking note of, and that Liquidware can help you with as well. especially if you're looking at as part of that migration platform, how do you right size your environment from moving on from your standard desktops? How are users actually utilizing their devices or utilizing their platform at the moment? What's it going to look like when they move into Azure? What size virtual machines are they going to be using? Especially if you want to use something like reserved instance pricing, like Jim said, to help massively reduce that cost. If you've got a static workload, then getting that right size upfront is obviously going to be really important to reducing all of the kind of OpEx costs that you'll be getting as part of moving into Azure. So if we are looking at each of those components, how do we then actually migrate them, and what tools we have to take into consideration? So the first is obviously the operating system. Now, Azure Marketplace actually has some pre-built Windows 10 images for you. So if you want, you could just take the existing image, customize it and re-upload and get what you want out of that image, and away you go. Or obviously you can take your on-premise images that you've built, maybe as part of your rest of your VDI environment that you might already have, and migrate and move that in. And that's also where technologies such as Citrix or VMware, and leveraging like MCS inside Citrix to help you with that image management and help you with uploading and keeping that up to date, because obviously that's kind of core component for you to get running. Next, obviously around that data. So how do we get that? Most customers recommend, and most customers are doing this now anyway, leverage a more modern data tool set. So leverage something like OneDrive to start redirecting users' folders and data, because then you can take advantage of container technology, such as the VHD module that we have inside ProfileUnity, or leveraging FSLogic's Office container to basically give you the ability to roam and keep those documents for your users and give them the best user experience, even if they're moving between non-persistent virtual desktops and machines. The two areas that we're going to be covering today in terms of that migration, which can cause a lot of hassle, are really around the applications, which obviously, if you have got different users have different applications, not everyone is using the same apps. And that could result in you having a sprawl of gold images and a lot of different machine pools. That could be a requirement, just one, for the user experience, but two, because the applications themselves, from a licensing point of view, might have a requirement where they can't be available for just every user. So you have to have those segregated onto different pools because of that. This is also going to hit you in terms of a cost issue on two fronts. One, there's obviously a large administrative overhead from running multiple gold images and having to basically manage and maintain that and keep that uploaded and maintain and going forward. And the second side is, particularly if you're looking around maybe like Windows 10 multi-session, if you have to have a lot of different desktop pools purely just to give those different application sets for different users, that means your users are going to be spread across a lot of different pools, which means that you're not actually going to get the correct user density that you might have if all of the users were in one pool of desktops. So if you are going to take advantage of that great Windows 10 multi-session, where you get a client OS and you can have a good user density and lots of users using it, so good user experience, massively driving down costs for the business, you're obviously going to not get that same level of user density, and you're going to require more virtual machines if you have multiple machine catalogs. So migrating those applications and making sure that we don't run into that issue is quite a big thing for moving into WVD. And lastly, then around the user profiles, because again, if we're going to do that migration the end user doesn't care about the platform they're really using. You just need to be able to give them the best user experience and ease that migration by basically keeping things the same as much as humanly possible. And this is going to be maybe a greater case if you are using WVD as an opportunity to move between different versions of Windows. So maybe you haven't quite finished off that Windows 7 migration yet, or you're looking to move away from 2016, like an on-premises RDSH type environment, and you want to move into multi-session Windows 10. Those are different profile types. So how do we then move that user's profile between different versions of Windows and different OS versions to keep that user experience going forward? So to tackle the first of those, and looking at the application side, is where we look at FlexApp. So FlexApp, fairly straightforward, is a containerization technology where we're basically redirecting the applications for the user into a VHD and mounting those dynamically. So what that means is that we are able to attach those VHDs at different points in time. We can attach them at machine boot if you want the application to be available for all of the users that are going to be logging onto that machine. We can attach them at login, so we're personalizing who has what applications, and we're able to mask those applications using our filter drivers so that two users on the same machine won't see the same applications. And we can even attach them post-login as well, if you only need those to be delivered as a just-in-time application. Our filter driver obviously works in mini mode to ensure that we don't have any conflicts with any other container technology or any other filter drivers. Again, so this can be great if you're already utilizing Office containers as part of your FS Logics and Microsoft 365 subscriptions. We will, FlexApp will work with those and have that integration to go forward. We don't require you to do any specialized image management. So all we need is that filter driver and our driver to be installed. The example, what we're going to do in a live demo very shortly, that was basically just a gold image or a marketplace image taken directly from Azure, and the agent was just installed via our content delivery network. I didn't even open up the desktop in any shape or form or open up the gold image. It was just delivered dynamically in when the machine started up. Because FlexApp is a part of ProfileUnity, it's a module of ProU, we're able to utilize ProU's filter engine to apply to FlexApp. That means that we're able to deliver a highly contextualized application delivery environment. So we can ensure that users will get applications maybe based on their user group membership in Active Directory, the site of the machine, potentially. So if you want users logging onto different machines, they'll get different app packages based on a machine group or a site and location, maybe based on other services or reg keys which are running on the machines. And we can also even base it on like OU filters or time of day as well. So maybe you don't want certain applications being available based on the weekend when the user's coming in. We can also, as part of FlexApp, import your existing app packages. So if you've already standardized on something like AppV, which a lot of our customers have, and you don't want to have to repackage your application, you can just import those directly into FlexApp, and the converter will automatically convert them into VHDs for you to be delivered. And then finally, which is kind of the focus of this webinar when we do the demo, is the fact that we can deliver applications from on-premise file shares, so just UNC path storage and DFS shares. I know Jim tweeted out last week about the public preview support for Active Directory integration into Azure files, so you could utilize that as well. But we also support cloud object storage natively inside the product. So you can just take your highly secure, highly cost optimized and still highly performant Azure blob storage and just deliver your applications that way instead. This gives you massive amounts of flexibility and cost savings when you're delivering those applications dynamically into your WVD workloads. What that kind of looks like just from a example point of view on the desktop, as far as the user is concerned, the applications still appear natively. They still appear inside program files. We're not virtualizing the applications. They just appear as locally installed apps. But if you check something like disk management, you can see that the applications are containerized in their own individual VHDs and basically connected and layered in. And we can see that currently working in that example with an FS Logics profile container as well to do that redirection. Which leads us nicely onto how do we deal with that profiles and that migration piece as well. And that's how that we look at ProfileUnity. So ProfileUnity is Liquidware's wider UEM profile management suite. And obviously there's multiple modules that we have inside of this product that can help you, such as privilege elevation or replacing group policy if that's an issue for your login times. But the focus for this is around what we call portability. And portability is our ability to capture parts of the user's profile and, in this instance, migrate it onto a different platform. And as part of that capture process, we convert it into the native Windows format when it's re-imported. So this is what basically allows us to capture maybe your Windows 7 or Windows 2016 or 2012 R2 users, capture their profile, and then when the user logs onto their virtual desktop session in WVD, their profile is automatically converted and migrated over to Windows 10 natively. As a follow-up, and in terms of a kind of a big advantage that we have along with FlexApp, is that we also support for the profile itself cloud storage. So this means that you don't have to set up expensive file shares or file storage inside Azure. It also can bring you some serious advantages when you're actually doing the migration process itself. So maybe you've got a edge site with a load of users that don't have a great link back to your primary site. Maybe the VPN isn't, site-to-site VPN isn't very good, and you don't want to have to be uploading all of the users' profile traffic across there over to a centralized UNC, which you've then got to replicate up into Azure over your express route link afterwards. You know, that's a lot of data traffic to go backwards and forwards. It's a lot of setup and additional cost. Instead, we can just have the user's profile be directly and securely uploaded into an Azure blob just over their standard internet connection, which means you don't have to worry about potentially about those site-to-site links. Also helps us to cover users such as maybe a user that's working from home or a user that's maybe traveling a lot and working out of hotels and Wi-Fi that you don't have, or networks that you don't have access or control of, where you can just allow them to automatically upload their profile as part of the standard process over the internet directly into the Azure blob. And because we're utilizing the native functionality of Azure blob for that, that's all encrypted and secured when it's uploaded and stored for them to go across. And setting up that integration inside of ProfileUnity is extremely easy. All you need to do is import the cloud credentials that you generate from that storage account itself. So we're just going to use like the keys and the SAS blob URL key to basically have that imported in. You can do that literally within a minute. It's very easy. And natively inside FlexApp, we have that ability to dynamically upload directly into the cloud. So you can just take your existing on-premises FlexApps, and once you've packaged them or you've converted them from AppV or MSIX, and then you can just upload those in the console to your storage location using the credentials. You don't have to do kind of a manual upload into any of the storage accounts. It's done very easily by just doing that. So there's nothing like doing a live demo to actually run through. So as part of this, this is just showing a traditional, normal on-premises virtual desktop that I have at the moment. Here's one that I made earlier for all intents and purposes. This desktop has had some customization done to it. So obviously I've set a background, I pinned a couple applications to my taskbar, and the only applications which are natively installed at the moment to this are the Office suite. Everything else in terms of 7-zip, Notepad and Chrome have all been actively connected as FlexApps, which we can see on my container piece here. So if we're going to migrate this user up into WVD, we can just make some standard changes. So we could technically look at, for example, BBC News. Maybe we'll add that in as a bookmark on a bookmark bar, just there. And maybe we'll pin Chrome to our taskbar as well at the same time, so that we've made some active changes. And what we'll do as an end user is that maybe this is the end of the day, you're going to migrate them over to WVD tomorrow, they just log off with their standard desktop, and so their profile will start being uploaded and migrated in. What that looks like from an actual backend point of view on the Azure storage account is just in the standard Azure storage account containers. So we've got two sections that I've created inside our Azure storage account. We've got one which contains our configuration itself. So this holds the information as to what applications should be applied for this config, what settings we want to port across for the user. these are pre-built as templates inside ProfileUnity. There's no need for you to do any work apart from you assigning what applications you want for the users. Otherwise, the actual profile capture process is already taken cared for you inside the product. And we can also then see our actual FlexApp packages, which we'll be delivering into the WVD session. So those are comprised of several components, just an XML configuration file, an icon file, and the actual VHD itself. And we do store those VHDs as dynamic VHDs. So you can see, for example, that Notepad only takes up 52 meg. So we're not going to be using up gigs and gigs per application inside your storage account, further reducing any of your cost going forwards, which can massively obviously help reduce your ongoing cost management. I think for my demo environment going forwards, my storage account costs me under £1 a month to store all my applications and all my user data going forwards. So it's very cost effective. And then if we're looking at the actual user profile itself, that's contained inside that portability container. So we can see what individual rule sets that we've got currently saved up. And if we have a look, I may obviously made some changes to my desktop just now when I logged off, and those were just uploaded just now at today's timestamps. So when we log into our WVD desktop, those should follow us across. So now, like I said, this is just a standard marketplace WVD desktop that was taken in. We get our password. So this WVD desktop was just made using the Azure Marketplace image. The agent was added just dynamically from a content delivery network, and then the user's logging in. The initialization process happens for the modules to be uploaded, and then the profile is being dynamically downloaded into the desktop at the moment. So that's what you're seeing with the portability settings being imported. How this is important is that we can combine this with something like a profile container. So if you combine this with like FSLogic's profile containers, because we store the portability settings as part of the local Windows profile, that will then be cached for the user for their second time login. So this is just the first time login download. Any subsequent logins will be incredibly fast because the settings are already cached and will basically allow you to follow you around and go around any of the processes and going forwards. We can obviously then combine that with any on-premises migration as part of a business continuity, because if we are going to potentially maybe have a scenario where our primary site has failed, we've used WVD as our failover process, and then we want to fail back afterwards, the only thing that's going to come down into our profile containers on either site are just going to be the deltas and the changes, which means that first time login after we've made that failover of the migration will be a slightly bit longer for that download to happen. And then once it's in place, it's cached and it's good to go to follow you around. So you can utilize either existing FSLogic's profile containers, or you can utilize ProfileUnity's profile disk containers as well. And we can see here now, all those settings have followed me. So I've got my background, I've got my applications pinned to my taskbar, and my FlexApps have been dynamically allocated and attached, because the only thing that was attached on this gold image was, again, just Office by default as part of the marketplace image. All my other applications have basically followed me as I've gone around. So that concludes obviously the demo for today as part of that overall migration piece. I think we're now going to be running over to Q&A, so I'll be handing back over to Ray. But thank you all for your time this morning.
Thanks, George. So here's a question that came in. It's regarding FlexApp. And someone says, if I have 20 users mounting an app, would I have 20 VHDs mounted?
So to answer that question, the answer is no. Basically, it's one read-only FlexApp for all of those users. So again, that's a good way of us saving storage costs. You just have one version of the app that's connected for all of those users in that read. And actually, to help mitigate any potential performance issues, if you're going to have a lot of users connecting to an app, or if you're using on-premises file server and you're not too sure on the performance for that, We enable cache mode on those applications as well. So each user gets a local VHD, which is attached to the machine, and the blocks are written down there for the application, and they run from there afterwards, which gives you the ability to have a very highly performant, locally behaving application, have that read only one copy of the app on the primary storage, and still have the ability also to fail over between different storage types if you require it as well.
Okay, great. I see another question here regarding FlexApp, and someone asks about the speed of the application packaging. You know, if they don't have packages already made or anything like that. Can you talk about that process a little bit?
So the app packaging process itself is extremely quick. The only thing that's basically involved around the packaging process is the generation of the VHD, and then the closing and the capturing of the VHD at the end, which generally is, you know, just about 10-15 seconds for the VHD to be generated, and then the same for the end point at the end. Otherwise, the capture process itself is exactly the same length of time as it would be to you to install an application normally, because we're not doing like a pre or post check. The filter driver is basically just capturing whatever happens during that process dynamically and copying it into a VHD and then just closing it off once you do the finish. So there's no great length of additional time to doing any package. And we actually have some examples of that available online if you want to have a look at those, obviously, or you can contact us directly and we can run you through that capture process to demo it if you require.
Okay, here's another question. I think this one's for Jim. What percentage of customers do you think will continue to use Windows 7 within WVD?
So that is an interesting question because Windows 7 gives you free extended updates for 3 years within Windows Virtual Desktop. We do see, in terms of the telemetry, less than 5% of people are running Windows 7. In talks with some of the customers, they are seeing this as a valuable get out of jail free card to keep some of those Windows 7 running for free in terms of that extended updates for the next 3 years. But most customers are, to be honest, are actually have got rid of most of their Windows 7. And for the ones that haven't, then they've already got a sunk investment in the hardware that is providing that OS, and investing more in terms of moving that OS into the cloud and doing more doesn't seem like something a lot of companies want to do, and I can't blame them, to be honest. So it's nice that it's there. It's great that that is an option for people to take advantage of if they want to or need to keep running Windows 7. But thankfully, we don't see that many people needing to do it.
Okay. Here's another question. If we're considering a migration over to Windows WVD, what's a good first step to take before we take that? You know, we take that next step into that migration.
So the real thing that you need to have is you need to have Azure AD configured, and you need to have that linked with your on-premises AD, because that's how the identity and authentication method work. Once you've got that, then it's super simple to start to roll things out. But yeah, that's the big step that people need to take. Having said that, almost all organizations that I talk to have already got that done. So it's a nice thing to say at the start of a project. Do you already have this? Yes, great. We can immediately move on to deploying desktops in WVD. If you are there and you've got your Azure AD sorted, quite a lot of people will use one of the provided Windows 10 gallery images. We have a sort of a plainer one, and we also have one with Office 365 installed, both of which are optimized for virtualization. And that's super easy, just to pick one of those gallery images and then deploy it, and you can be up and running very, very quickly. I think George mentioned that that's a good place to start as well in his presentation. And then perhaps you can get on to using your own customized images once you've just had a feel for it, and move on to deploying remote apps and doing your personalization or doing FlexApp as well, in terms of filling that experience out.
Okay. This one I think is for George. George, I noticed in your presentation that you were mentioning some of the different cloud storage for the VHD. What different cloud storage do you support?
We don't support just Azure Blob. We're fairly agnostic in that regard. So we also support Amazon AWS S3 and Google Cloud Storage as well. That obviously can be excellent if you're potentially utilizing another public cloud platform at the moment and you want to migrate over to WVD, because you don't have to worry about trying to potentially set up maybe file shares on both sides and then trying to set up a link between the two and trying to get stuff replicated across. Obviously, you could just automatically replicate the user's settings and their existing applications across into the cloud storage on the other side, into an Azure Blob, and then just have the user migrate that way, which is obviously a much cleaner and easier process, kind of the same methodology that you'd use for the on-premises users as well.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to scan through here and see if I see any other additional questions. Oh, here's another one that just came in. With end user compute being moved to the cloud with VHD, how do Microsoft recommend controlling what users do and where they go? Followed, they say on-premise, this would be done by UTM appliance, doing URL filtering, application control, and anti-malware, etc.
So there's a couple of answers to that. One is that you can, if you want, take your existing on-prem apps and move them directly up into the cloud and use exactly the same methodology that you're used to. And the other is that there are lots of services within the cloud which will enable you to limit on a per VM basis the network traffic and whitelist URLs and blacklist URLs that users can go to, and you can do that like on a per VNet or a per VM basis. Now, I am not a network security guy, so you'll have to forgive me if I can't go into any more detail on that, because it is not my my thing. But if you do want to know more about that, then you can send me an email to jim.moyle@microsoft.com, and I will make sure I get you an answer from the relevant people.
All right. Well, I think that's taken us to the end of our questions, and we're running up on the end of today's presentation. Thank you, Jim and George, for bringing us through today's presentation. Just a reminder to anyone out there, we have been recording today's session, and we'll make it available. So keep an eye on your inbox in the days following the event, where we'll have a link to that recording, a copy of the slides, and some other information that's related that will be of use to you as you consider your choices when thinking about migrating over to WVD. So thank you both, George and Jim, for your presentation today and your time sharing that with us. So thank you very much, and have a good day, everyone.